Okay, we have 4 Assembly folks with us here today, and we thank them very much for coming. Having a Democratic trifecta in New York State, is shining the light on the New York State Assembly, which has always been a very Democrat, progressive kind of place. And with the folks that we've helped to get elected to the Assembly and the Senate, we want to be sure that everybody is, holding that progressive line. So we wanted to get to know our Assembly folks. We've gotten to know Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Shelley Mayer very well, and certainly Alessandra Biaggi. So we want to establish a relationship with our Assembly people and let them know what's on our minds and how you think about issues that are of importance to you. So the format for this is going to be, I'm going to just do a brief introduction for each person, and then I'm going to ask a question of each of you, which if you can limit it to 2 or 3 minutes, that would be great. And then we're passing index cards around, so if you want to write a question down, you can do that, and then we'll collect the cards. And we'll see how it's going in terms of reading the questions out loud to the people, or whether it just makes sense to stand up and ask your question. Okay? And I'm going to introduce by order of seniority in the Assembly. Okay, so our first person is Gary Pretlow, who's from AD 89, which represents Mount Vernon and Yonkers. He's been in the Assembly since 1992. Got his college degree at Baruch in 1972. He's a licensed stockbroker and insurance agent. Started his political career on the Mount Vernon City Council. And has then graduated to the Assembly, right, from the Mount Vernon City Council, right? Gary Pretlow is chair of the Westchester delegation to the state, representing both Assembly and Senate folks, okay? So this is an important role. He also chairs the gaming committee, and is a member of the steering committee on the Assembly. I hope I got all that right here. Chairing the committee on racing and waging. Okay, he's a member of the Ways and Means. So just keep this in your mind in terms of which laws we're interested in. Have to go through several committees, as we've learned. So he's a member of the Ways and Means Committee, the Rules Committee, the Codes Committee, and the Insurance Committee. All right, Jeffrey Dinowitz represents AD 81, which is in the Bronx since 1994. He's born and raised in the Bronx, attended Bronx Public Schools, Lehman College, Brooklyn College Law School, served as administrative law judge before joining the Assembly, being elected to the Assembly. And chaired the Bronx County Committee from 2008 to 2016. Mr. Dinowitz chairs the Judiciary Committee and is a member of the Rules, Health, and Election Law Committees. Okay. Did I miss anything?
Ways and Means.
And Ways and Means. Okay, thank you. Tom Abbinanti represents the 92nd AD, which includes Greenberg and Mount Pleasant. Tom was born in Brooklyn?
Yes.
Okay. Attended Fordham College, NYU Law School. He served 2 terms as Greenberg town councilman, 10 terms as county legislator, and was majority leader for 3 terms, Westchester County majority leader. He is going to chair the Committee on Oversight, Analysis, and Investigation, and is a member of the Health, Judiciary, and Code Committees. Did I miss any?
Health, Judiciary, Codes. That's enough.
That's enough.
You were in
Okay.
election mode.
I just got off 2 and I just moved over to others, so.
Okay, yeah, it's all fluid. All right,
So in a state of flux, I just took over the
We'll get a
chairmanship
form real
of
quickly.
yes. And our newest member to the Assembly is Nader Sayegh, representing Yonkers in AD 90. Mr. Sayegh was born and raised in Yonkers, attended Yonkers Public Schools, got his associate's degree from Westchester Community College, his BA from Lehman College, master's degree in international affairs from Fairleigh Dickinson University, and his law degree from Pace College of Law, School of Law. And as the newest member, he is a member on the Banks Committee, the Cities Committee, Energy, Health, and Insurance, and Real Property Taxation. Very arcane. But important, especially with some of the laws that are going through. So, if we could ask a question, I'll ask one. And is Mika Sifri here? Mika's here too. You can ask the second one. And we'll just go down the line. What are your constituents' top 3 challenges, and how do you see the Democrat trifecta addressing those issues? Gary, if you could start.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for putting this together. I relish the thought of speaking to all of you and giving you my sordid thoughts on a lot of things. Rest assured that whatever I say is what I really feel, and I'm always going to tell you what I feel and not what I think you want to hear, because you ask some things because you want to know and not want to hear something to verify what you already think. That being said, I represent, I guess, the poorer part of Westchester County, Mount Vernon, Southwest Yonkers, and parts there. And the 3 priorities of my district are, and it's you've heard this before, it's jobs, 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 then it's education, and now I have an issue with immigration, especially in the Yonkers portion of the district. Southwest Yonkers, I have many documented and undocumented immigrants in that part of the district, as well as quiet as it's kept, McLean Avenue. But they don't talk about it as much. But believe me, there are a lot of undocumented individuals around the McLean Avenue section of Yonkers that are all feeling the brunt of this craziness we have going on in Washington, D.C. But to answer your question, it was jobs, it was immigration, and education.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So, before I answer it, I just want to say that while I've been in the Assembly for a fairly long time now, I've never been more charged up and excited about going back to Albany and starting the legislative session, because many of the things that we in the Assembly have done, have passed over the years, we're going to do it for real this time, because we're passing it, and so upset. So tomorrow, we're expecting to pass a lot of our election reform bills, not all of them, but a whole bunch of them. One of them is mine, the one that was mentioned about transferring your enrollment no matter where you are in the state, where you move and everything. But a whole bunch of good election bills. On Tuesday, we're passing the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act. And we're also going to be banning conversion therapy next week. Next week, we plan to and expect to pass the Reproductive Health Act to codify Roe v. Wade, as well as guaranteeing access to contraception. And there's a whole slew of, because I want to answer the question you asked. I hope I remember the question. Climate change, tenant protection, criminal justice reform, including bail reform, MTA funding, single payer, Child Victims Act, DREAM Act, campaign finance reform, marijuana legalization, gun control. Those are a number of the things that we're hoping to do, but they of course have to be negotiated with the Senate. You know, the Senate's brand new. They have to get their act together. But the stuff we're doing that I just mentioned are things where we've agreed upon. So the election bills that we're passing tomorrow are agreed upon, 2 House bills that I would expect the governor to sign immediately. In terms of the question you asked, I would say based upon the emails, the conversations, everything we get from constituents, it's pretty clear that in my district, the 3 biggest issues are, number 1, education, fixing our schools, getting enough funding for the schools, also mass transit MTA funding, and we have to do something to increase funding for the MTA. It's not just a city issue, it's also a regional issue. And thirdly, in our area, we are dealing with the issue of overdevelopment. So I would say those three are the ones that seem most important to the people in my community.
Good afternoon. Okay, where's the,
Mine's better.
I'll use yours, thanks. There we go, it's working. There's a button on there somewhere. Anyway, good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us to come meet with you. I think I know a lot of you already. I'm sorry to hear you feel you're introducing us to all of you. I've been in local government for, as you said, for many years. And I'm now in the Assembly, just finished my 8th year. Sorry about the confusion on which committee I was on, because I was on 6 committees, and they said, well, you're not going to be a committee chair, you got to give some up. And so we were jockeying back and forth on which ones I was going to give up, because I wanted to stay on all 6 as well as chair a new committee, but they wouldn't let me do that. In my district, I think there's a dichotomy between the big issues that people talk about, and then which they just expect you to get done, like you guys. We're talking about stuff that Jeff just mentioned. But there's also the day-to-day issues. And I think the day-to-day issues are, in my area, is number 1 is education. Number 2, I think, is infrastructure. Our roads are in terrible shape. It's nice that we're getting in, we have a new bridge crossing over the Tappan Zee. We're going to have a new LaGuardia. But I've had to buy 8 new rims and tires over the last 8 years, traveling back and forth to Albany because of potholes. And so I think that's a major issue. Environmental protection is still an important issue in my district. People are very concerned about the and I have one more issue that I spend a lot of time working on that's important to a lot of people, and that is providing services for people with special needs. The state of New York has basically forgotten our most vulnerable, whether they be senior citizens or people with developmental disabilities or people with mental health issues. They're populating our streets now more and more as the homeless. We're not providing for them. So those are the issues that I'm most concerned with.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I had the privilege of really becoming associated with CD 16. As you know, CD is Congressional District 16, which is presently held by Congressman Eliot Engel. And my past election, actually, Congressman Engel and I had the same headquarters, and that really built up my relationship with CD 16. But I gotta say, I'm very proud of the level of motivation and the involvement. And we know that as citizens, to get issues done, you gotta speak up and you gotta organize. But in my district, and I represent the bulk of the Yonkers, education, of course, is a key issue. It's been expressed by the committees. I think there's many issues on the table. Education impacts our families, our students, and communities like Yonkers, where you have a high number of special ed population, English language learners, and immigrants. It becomes crucial to get proper funding. And we always felt, and we took a strong position, that the state funding formula is not equitable. When you look at New Jersey, right across the state, some 6 months ago, Governor Murphy revised the entire educational formula in New Jersey that makes it more equitable for all students. And we feel in New York, the argument that leave it alone, don't bother with it, is nonsense. In Yonkers, we lose about $5,000 of state funding per child every single year, times 27,000 kids. You can imagine the losses we incur that impacts music, art, and sports, and phys ed, and so forth. To me, education is crucial, healthcare is very crucial, voter registration, and then the issue of immigrants and the criminal justice system and reform. I'm also an attorney, in addition to being a lifelong educator for some 35 years. I've served in a classroom. I was a school principal for many years. I was on the board of trustees, so I understand it from that end. I served as president of the Big 5 school districts. So my issues are really, to a large extent, urban issues that across the segment you've heard from my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mika, you wanna-
Hi, my name is Micha Sifri. I'm on the steering committee here at CD16. And my question is about campaign finance reform. I just first want to say thank you all for coming. And we appreciate all the things that you are moving really fast on to get through. A lot of this is stuff that should have been done a long time ago. In 2018, just 100 people gave more money to state candidates than all the money given by small donors, 137,000 people. That's according to a new study from the Brennan Center. $7.5 million from 100 big donors compared to less than $6 million from 137,000 people giving less than $175 each. Clearly, big money has too much influence in our politics, and I would say that on the issues that you mentioned, like overdevelopment and education and healthcare, the power of big money in Albany is what keeps us from getting more equitable policies on all those other issues. They tell us there's no money. That's because the money is being controlled too much by those big donors. So my question for you is, are you committed not just to voting for fair elections reform, which has been an issue before, but never had we had the chance of Democrats controlling both chambers? So are you as Assemblyman committed to fighting for passing fair elections financing, which would give public matching funds so that all those small donations are now going to be worth a lot more and ordinary people will have more of a voice in the process?
Have you go through one by one and answer that, that'd be great.
I guess it's my time for the first answer you don't want to hear. I am in favor of lowering contribution limits. I think that there is too much money. People are allowed to contribute way too much money. So I do think the limits should be lowered. The Supreme Court said something about free speech, which I totally don't agree with, and hopefully someday we can change the Supreme Court and change that, because I don't think that money should be treated as free speech, which under our Constitution, as verified by the Supreme Court, it is now. I am opposed to public financing. I don't think that any of you should be forced to pay for any of our campaigns if you don't want to. If you have the desire to support one of us, then you should be free to support any one of us. But if you don't like any of us, you shouldn't have your tax dollars diverted to campaigns of other individuals. It costs the city of New York around $60 million a year for public financing. It'll cost maybe 3 times that much for state financing, which is $175 million of taxpayer money going to do something that's not going to change the ultimate outcome anyway. I don't want to sound jaded, but if you look at what's happened in New York City, the incumbents are still winning. The incumbents are still, even though, and they get more money, they get the matching funds. And there's too much leeway for illegal things to happen with these matching funds. I've read too many stories where people get matching funds and then they hire their cousin to do something and they buy a computer at the end of the election. They keep the computer, they do all kinds of things, which is really, really bad. So I hope that answers your question. I guess I'm 99% with you. I just don't like the public financing part of it.
Okay, we've got our work to do with Mr. Pretlow.
I have been and continue to be supportive of public financing, and I believe I've co-sponsored the legislation. However, the devil really is in the details, and there are things we have to be aware of. It's not only the cost. I mean, that's a cost of, I mean, one could argue that if it costs the state money, and it will, and it'll cost a lot of money, who knows what benefits we will reap as a result. But because of the Citizens United case, because of the fact that there can be independent expenditures in let's take a New York City Council campaign where I believe you can spend, including matching funds right now, I think around $200,000. An independent committee can spend on one candidate's behalf $1 million. So while theoretically all the candidates are on a level playing field. In fact, all too often they're not because of the outside expenditures. So ultimately, that kind of defeats the purpose of public financing. And I don't know that we're going to be changing the Supreme Court in a favorable way for a very long time to come. So I don't think we can count on that decision being reversed anytime soon. But having said that, I think we should do it, but I think most importantly, aside from public financing, we really need to lower the contribution limits. And I don't know who all those people are who are giving millions of dollars, who are influencing us allegedly, but I don't think I've gotten any of that money, and I think most of us haven't. I don't know where that goes, but it hasn't gone in this direction for sure.
Thank you. Let me echo Jeff's comments. I fully agree with him. I think we voted for public financing when it was the Silver Bill a few years ago. I have sponsored a compromise measure. I have a measure in right now that would allow public financing for judges and district attorneys, which I think would pass muster with the United States Supreme Court. There's one of their decisions where they distinguished judges from other politicians. And so if we're looking at a constitutional approach, I would say let's start there. But I fully support funding through campaign, public funding. I also don't get very much money from, I don't think I get any money from those 100. If you take a look, I generally run about $40,000 in my campaign account, which is absolutely nothing if you're talking about a serious campaign opponent. I had somebody who self-funded for $100,000 the first time I ran, and I managed to raise $100,000 back and won the first election. But I think Jeff's point is very well taken, and that is we have to be careful about outsiders coming in. We have had several situations where incumbent assembly members who vote with the Democrats, they are Democrats and they vote with the Democrats, they don't walk away, have been challenged by outsiders. Now these groups, maybe the charter school people, the charter people are some of them that raise a lot of money. They don't go after our upstate Democrats on the basis of charter schools and public education. They will find some issue that they voted on, some liberal issue or progressive issue, which is not necessarily consistent with their community, but they're good Democrats. And then they spend several $100,000 attacking them. And those members are still with us only because the speaker raises the money and goes to their defense. So that's the problem we're dealing with. So we have to have an escape hatch somehow. Somebody's got to figure out a way to have public financing, but that escape hatch where there is outside money coming in attacking somebody who you would want to see stay in office. The other thing that I think we have to add to this is the public is not necessarily in favor of public financing at this point. And we have done a very poor job of explaining to them they're paying for it one way or another. That's the whole you want public financing so we don't have to take money from people who we disagree with, who may want something from the legislature, but are the only people who are contributing to your campaign. You're not going to send money back. It shows up, you take it. Your treasurer puts it in the bank and you spend it. So we want to be free of that. But the public doesn't understand the influence that this money has and how many contracts get given through the executive branch and other policy things that are shaded that maybe we don't even know about as members. That somehow in the process it gets influenced and that costs the public money. And they don't understand that. That old line about pay me now or pay me later? Well, pay us now so that everybody can run for office, whoever they are, and then you don't have to worry about those big ones.
Thank you very much. Like my colleagues, I support campaign reforms and campaign finance reforms. And I think there is a lot of special issues that we need to look at. And in any legislation, I think the key is to look at the fine points and really try to fine-tune, as they say, the legislation so that it's more reflective of the needs. I was fortunate. My campaign when I ran was primarily grassroots funding. So for me, that's what I relied on. It's my message, my support base of people that were giving you $10 and $25 and $100, and that's how I raised the bulk of my campaign. And I understand, I think all of us realize that the necessity is exhibited by how much influence large corporations and individuals have on the political process. And really the bottom line is buy-in candidates and buy-in legislation. And as was stated earlier, having sometimes crucial funding that's necessary for education and healthcare being pushed in gear in different directions because someone bought someone's vote or support. So I'm all for developing a fair playing field that encourages individuals to get involved and not to worry that they have to run against somebody that's financed by very powerful donors. So I think all of us are on board on supporting these initiatives. They're worthy, they're meaningful, and I think the issue is to really look and fine-tune and make sure at the end of the day legislation is passed that takes into consideration all the issues presented by my colleagues.
Can I just add one more comment? I forgot. I have also introduced legislation that would allow it locally, a local option. The problem with that is how do you structure it? How do you manage it? So I put that legislation in after we passed the bill that allowed for statewide public financing. And if we come up with a mechanism to do a statewide bill, I would reintroduce the bill so that Yonkers or Greenberg or even Westchester County, if they wanted to do a public financing, would have a mechanism in place so they could opt into it.
Okay, good, thank you. All right, where do you, each of you stand on supporting the New York Health Act? And do you see it being pushed to the forefront, not immediately, I understand, but further along in this session?
100% in favor. There are some questions on the cost of it. The Assembly has passed this bill at least every session since I can remember. Dick Gottfried, who's the chair of health since Lincoln was president, has been the sponsor of this bill, and we're going to pursue. We may be able to start it in a smaller fashion than overall, but I'm 100% supportive of it.
Great.
I've always been a supporter. I am a supporter. I will be a supporter. I'm a co-sponsor of the bill and have been so for a long time. And we have passed it for the past few years. Now that things have changed on the other side of the building, I hope that there'll be serious negotiations taking place to actually make this real. There is an enormous cost attached to it. However, I believe that when all is said and done, it's a money saver. It's a money saver. So it's something that we look forward to, and this could be perhaps the most significant thing that we could do in New York State. And if things are different at some point, maybe this is something we can do on the federal level. In the meantime, New York has to act.
Ditto. I have voted for it. I will continue to vote for it. I'm a co-sponsor of it. I think the importance of it is not really understood by a lot of people. We have a situation where in New York, we have a Democratic governor who has privatized Medicaid. I don't think people realize that. Medicaid now is in the hands of, quote, health homes. That's managed care institutions. Those are private insurance companies. Those are private entities. There are some not-for-profits that are trying to compete. But we've got Medicaid in the hands of private industry. And we've got to take it back. And I don't know any other way to take it back other than a full structural reform like the New York Health Act. So I fully support it.
I support the New York Health Act, and fortunately one of the committees, the 5 committees I'm on, is health. So, and my affiliation, in addition to education, for many, many years, has been on healthcare, serving on hospital boards, and many of my family members are in the healthcare field. And I've come to realize that over the last maybe 30, 40 years, healthcare in America has gone from proper financing for hospitals and individual doctors to big business. And it seems as if 50% of all the costs of healthcare has gone to administrative costs that at the end of the day, as was stated earlier, is not cost effective. So I think we need to look at not only supporting the Health Act, but to look at ways to really redefine how the distribution of funds in healthcare are undertaken.
Good, thank you very much. Just to let you know, we're having a forum here on January 27th. We're going to have Gustavo Rivera and Dick Gottfried here along with Katie Robbins to talk about this, so we invite you all to come back and participate in that with us. We'll talk more about that after this session. One other health-related question, if you could each talk about the Comprehensive Contraceptive Care Act. It's not linked with the Reproductive Health Act, which is getting, rocketed through. Just want to make sure you're all on board with supporting the Reproductive Health Act as it stands. And, the Contraceptive Care Act is in the Insurance Committee, I believe. So making sure that it gets out of that committee quickly and maybe talk us through the process for that going through.
That bill is on the agenda, on the Insurance Committee agenda for Monday, and I intend to vote in favor of it.
Okay, good.
And I definitely support the Health Act. That's going to happen.
Okay.
I'm a co-sponsor of the bill, and it's going to come out of committee, as was said, and it's going to probably be on the Assembly floor next Tuesday, a week from Tuesday.
One additional question about that, is that also going to cover undocumented women?
I'd have to check. If I were a guessing person, I would say yes, but I would have to check for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, ditto. I voted for them in the past and will continue to do so.
I also support the act, and for me, I'm just privileged as a freshman assemblyman to come into a situation, I think now more than ever, where you have a solid Democrat majority in the Assembly and the Senate and the governorship. So I think it's now or never, and I really think this is a time where a lot of history can be made in New York.
But then a specific question for each of you, and then we can open it up a bit. Mr. Pretlow, what are your priorities as leader of the Westchester delegation and as chair of the gaming committee? What are your top 3 priorities, would you say? You had mentioned when you were here the last time that you wanted to legalize the fantasy sports gaming as a way to...
We legalized fantasy sports a couple of years ago. My interest now is sports betting, straight
sports
up
betting. Okay.
Sports betting. Constitutionally, it is allowed in New York State Constitution to be practice performed at freestanding casinos, Native American casinos, as well as regular C Corp casinos. My goal or ambition is to make it available to people mobily. Because what's happening right now is New Jersey has legalized it, and New Jersey does have mobile sports betting, and it's easier for more than half of the population of the state of New York to get to New Jersey than it is to get to Monticello, which is 90 miles away. I mean, we can see New Jersey from, like Sarah Palin's, I can see New Jersey from my window. And what's happening now is a lot of New Yorkers have the apps on their phones. They drive across the George Washington Bridge. They park in Fort Lee. They make their bets. Yes, they make their bets in New Jersey because you have to there is geo boundaries built in, and they drive back to New York. Jeff Corral, who is a New Yorker, he actually, I don't know if you know Jeff Corral, but he owns Newmark. He's a big real estate guy in Manhattan. He also runs the Meadowlands, and he was actually saying how silly New York was for not doing this when we had the opportunity to do it. In the month of September, the state of New Jersey took in $25 million from sports betting. As you all know, all monies that are derived through gaming in this state go to education. So I look at this as a loss to education, and if New Jersey, which is a third of the size of New York, can do $25 billion a month, which I believe is mostly New York money, we can do $75 million a month, and that's $750 million if we just do it for 10 years and have it I guess I can't do 12 times tables, $750 million of revenue that goes toward education, which I think that, like I said, one of my big priorities was education. Nader's priority is the Yonkers School District. We had an extra $1 billion in the education field. I think it could only be beneficial. So I'm still pushing for that. There are questions as to whether, this gets technical, it's my view that if a server is located within a casino, then the person operating mobily off of that server could be or should be considered in the casino. Some lawyers say yes, some lawyers say no. I'm with the yes because I want the $1 billion additional monies in education.
Thank you. Mr. Dinowitz, as chair of the Judiciary Committee, what are your priorities to improve the judicial selection process? And maybe you could start back up a little bit and just say what are your 3 priorities for your committee?
Sure. The Judiciary Committee, as you may know, has very broad jurisdiction over many aspects of New York law, the domestic relations law, the real property law, the civil practice law and rules, the Indian law. I mean, there's a long laundry list of things that go through our committee. One thing we do is any constitutional amendment has to come through my committee. So, for example, the two of the election law bills that are on the agenda for tomorrow, and I'm also on the election committee, dealing with no excuse absentee ballots and early, no, there are 2. Well, what are the 2? No excuse absentee ballots, as well as, same-day registration. Both of those come through the Judiciary Committee, so those are very high priorities because election law stuff this year is a high priority of mine. But in addition, last year, one of the things that I was able to do was to secure funding to do something that hasn't been done in almost a quarter of a century, and that is to add to the number of state Supreme Court justices in New York. Why that is so important is because of the tremendous backlogs that exist in many jurisdictions. So I got an extra judge for the Bronx, of course, where we do have big backlogs, Queens, Staten Island, Long Island, and the judicial district that Westchester is a part of. And while one judge in each of those jurisdictions won't, cause miracles to happen, it really does help. And I'm going to continue to try to do that because I think that we really have to, as they say, justice delayed is justice denied. And both on the criminal and the civil side, we have to have enough judges. Also, one of the top priorities, if not the top priority, is fighting for funding for civil legal services, which always has been a priority of the Democratic Assembly. That is to make sure that that many areas, such as fighting foreclosure prevention, for example, or representing lower income people in dealing with family cases. It's just a whole array of areas. Civil legal services are extremely important if there's going to be justice in the state of New York. And finally, and this, I guess we work with this, but it actually goes through the Codes Committee. Bail reform and sentencing reform are really very important priorities this year. And I'm hoping and I believe, I guess because I'm very positive right now, I really believe we're going to get a lot of this stuff done this year now that we have partners in the Senate that are going to work with us on doing this. So I guess those are them.
Tom, what are your priorities as chair of your committee?
Okay.
The Committee on Oversight, Analysis, and Investigation. I have to say that.
I am just assuming this position. I am going to be meeting with the Speaker's office, some of my fellow committee chairs and the members of this committee to see if we can highlight the areas that they see as the most important at this point. There's a whole lot of things that we could look at, but we only have 2 years, very limited amount of staff, and very limited amount of time. So we're going to have to figure out what the most important areas are. But in general, I see the committee as having the responsibility to look to make sure that the laws the legislature in general has passed are actually being followed by the executive branch. And also to see whether what we've done is working. So that's very broad. That's why I would be working with my colleagues to see which areas. For example, we passed a bill that requires the DOT to do a study of railroad crossings because we had a horrendous problem in Mount Pleasant. They have never come down with a report on recommendations on how to improve railroad crossings. And I hear from my colleagues that there's lots of other bills like that that have turned into law, and the government has just never done anything. So the question is it because we have incompetent commissioners, that they don't have enough money, or are they being blocked by the governor's office? And I think we're going to have to figure out how do we approach this in a responsible fashion. I think also that we have to take a look at how the ethics of the executive branch. Since I have been in the legislature, every year we have reformed the way legislators have to work. And we hear over and over again that the problem with New York State government is the ethics of legislators, that they have outside jobs, as if they could live on $79,000 a year in Westchester County or in Manhattan, you know, that we have outside jobs, or that we are not paying attention to what we're doing, or whatever. On the other hand, there have just been as many indictments and convictions in the executive branch, and yet we've done nothing to reform any of the ethical mandates. We disclose on certain documents, and yet the people who we vote on budgets, but the people who actually hand out the money in the executive branch don't have to fill out the same copious forms that we have to fill out. So there's all kinds of issues like that, but we haven't set an agenda yet. And as I said, I think this is more of a group exercise. This is going to be, I'm going to be meeting with some of my colleagues, meet with the Speaker's office, and let's try to narrow this down and say, so at the end of 2 years, we can look back and we can say, we didn't just argue with the governor, we actually made some improvements to state government is functioning better.
Can you each speak to how you coordinate your committee with the Senate, the equivalent in the Senate? How do you
In the
coordinate
past,
that?
it has not been coordinated. I've had several conversations with Jim Skoufis, the new senator and the new chair of that. Jim and I have a very similar view on this, and where it's appropriate, we will coordinate. I think even where it's appropriate, we'll try to coordinate with the Comptroller and the Attorney General's office. We don't want to have all kinds of different things going on the same issue. And as I said, I think he shares my view. There's a lot of stuff out there to look at, and we don't want to waste our time by two different committees looking at the same thing. So we're going to try to take a reasonable, organized approach, and I'll be able to give you a better report on this in about 6 months after we've had a chance to get it started.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, we've got some questions for Mr. Dinowitz. I wanted to, so how do you each stand about on the issue of ending the waiting period for party affiliations voting? If you could each answer that, that'd be great.
Let's start with that. I think it's healthy part of voter reform. Issues that have been brought to the attention of the legislation really amount to whether or not political party organizations can be rated. And very often, if someone is a registered Democrat and Republicans don't like the Democrat and they decide, let's get a couple of hundred people to change overnight and then take over. The biggest concern we got to really confront is whether or not the process is safeguarded. I can understand that if somebody truly wants to change their registration and they do it for the right purposes, then of course we all welcome, change it as soon as you want or whenever you want. But if you're doing it because you're looking to raid another party or you're looking to disseminate somebody else's base, then it's something we have to be concerned about.
Can we go this way?
Yeah.
I am in favor, right now, 1 year is too long, but we have to have a reasonable time period. I know this is not popular in the public, but they often don't understand and see what we've seen. I lost a primary, a Green Party primary, when I was running for the state Senate many, many years ago. There were, something like 40 votes in the primary, and all of the people who voted against me were new voters who registered and voted absentee. Okay? It was later found out that they were voting for a judge in Yonkers who ended up going to jail. And the person who was collecting them for him opened them up and wrote in the name of my opponent, okay? And there's a whole story about this. I'm not going to go into it right now. But this is what happens when you have a system that is not properly supervised. Now, how is that relevant to the question we have here? Well, if you saw what happened not long ago, the Astorino people decided they were going to move a lot of Republicans from the Republican Party to the Independence Party. And it turns out there was a lawsuit over it, et cetera, et cetera. So, as my colleague said, people should be able to move from one party to another, but you want to do it far enough in advance so that you don't have mass movements of people. Now, there were a lot of young people who wanted to vote for Bernie Sanders or Cynthia Nixon or whatever, but you know, you can't decide on a particular day that tomorrow's election day, I'm now going to go vote for that person. You've got to have a little bit of foresight.
Why not? This works in so many other states.
Yeah, but in the state of New York, I mean, if you allow this, you're going to have Donald Trump delegates going to the Democratic Convention in upstate New York when all of the Republicans decide that there's no primary for a Republican candidate in New York. They will all re-register, and that's not going to happen down here in the 16th CD. But you try going upstate New York where there are very few Democrats who could very easily be overwhelmed by a segment of the Republicans registering, and then registering back in the Republican Party again. So I'm in favor of shortening the time period, but I don't know what the proper time period would be.
Thank you very much. Nader Sayegh has to leave, so I appreciate your spending time with us. Please come back. And wanted to announce that Elliot Engel just came and.
Okay, I'll answer the question, and I'll probably say the same thing he did, except briefer. So right now, based on the changed primary date that we're about to pass, the waiting period is in essence 240 days approximately. I think that's too long. Should we eliminate it? Absolutely not. We should shorten it. We should shorten it. Right now, if we eliminated it, a bunch of Republicans can register as work family party members and take over the party. I don't want to see that happen. We've seen in other states where they don't have this limit, this time period, where Republicans have voted in Democratic primaries, either to vote for the more conservative candidate or more likely to vote for the person they perceive as the weaker candidate to run against the Republican in November. So while it sounds like a nice reform to say, oh, let people choose whatever party they want on the day of the election or the day of the primary, in fact, I believe it's really a bad idea. It'll weaken the Democratic Party, and I don't want to make it easier for Republicans to make mischief in our party. I'm not a member of the League of Women Voters. I'm a partisan Democrat, and I want Democrats to get elected. And I don't want to do anything that's going to diminish that possibility. And eliminating the period altogether will do just that, in my opinion.
It's a good point.
I agree with both of my colleagues. The time limit should be shortened, but definitely not eliminated. If people were allowed to change whenever they wanted to, it leads to individuals taking over the smaller parties, not the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party, but the Green Party, the Reform Party, the Women's Equity Party. All of those parties run risk of being taken over by a group. This group right here, we have enough people in this room right now to control an election of the Green Party. If we all say,
what do you think?
okay, we're all going to switch from whatever we are now. We're going to become Green Party members. We're going to run Eileen for our chairperson, and she's going to be the candidate. And boom, it happens.
This
Yes,
room is enough to take it over.
exactly.
Gotcha. All right, understood. So what committee does this fall in, discussing this point?
That would fall under the Election Law Committee.
Okay.
I think I guess I'm the only one up here who's on the
I
election
was
law
on it
committee.
until about a week ago.
We kicked them off.
Yes, yes.
Okay, we all hear you. How would you commit then to 60 days? Make it 60 days.
It sounds like an auction or something. Do I hear 90? I won't commit to anything. I will commit that I believe it should be shortened. What that should be, I think it wouldn't be wise to say, oh, well, it should be X days, because then you'll say, well, make it X minus 30 or make it X minus 60. I believe it should be shortened. I think right now, if you want to vote in this year's primary, you have had, and you were switching parties, you would have had it done at 25 days prior to the last general election. That's ridiculous. I totally agree. That's absurd. But it has to be a reasonable time so that there isn't a situation where there can be raiding of political parties, where there can be Republicans trying to influence outcomes in our party primary.
Can I respond?
Okay, yes.
I think this is not about the number of days. This is about what's going on in the process. I would want to look to see at what point do candidates declare, because I don't want to see people switch parties on the basis of who the candidates are. I want people in parties because they believe in the principles of those parties. And there are some parties right now that don't belong in existence because they don't believe in anything, okay? But on the other hand, those parties that do have principles should not be taken over because some candidate wants to generate some support. So I would want to look at the schedule. After we change the primary date, we have to now then look and say, when does the process start? How far back do we have to go? Where does the state go? That's the way I'd answer that question.
Okay, good. We're running short of time. We've got to finish up in about 2 minutes. But there are a couple of other areas, a couple questions around fixing rent stabilization laws and how to do that. And, you know, there's unstable housing all over Westchester as well. So what can we do? I know that the rental laws are up for change soon.
Okay. I know it affects not just New York City, but
Right.
most of the people affected are from New York City. What we have fought for many years in the Assembly and have passed bills, which I'm hoping we can maybe do some in the Senate this year. We've passed bills to end what's known as vacancy decontrol. We've passed legislation to end what's called MCI's, major capital improvements, whereby if a landlord puts in, say, a new boiler, they can then raise the rent, which I don't have so much of a problem with. What I have a problem with is that it's a permanent increase rather than just allowing the landlord to recoup the money that's put in. You know, the landlords would say, well, what's our incentive for putting in a new boiler if we can't keep a permanent increase? The incentive is it doesn't cost you a penny ultimately, and you have a building with a new boiler, which is therefore more valuable. And there are other forms of increases, what's used to be called luxury decontrol, individual apartment increases. There are so many ways landlords get huge amounts of money, not to mention what's known as preferential rents. And if we can negotiate good bills this year with the Senate, and I hope we can, I think we can really make major reforms. And I'll just end by saying this. If you were to look at a graph of how New York City, and I guess rents in general, have gone up over the years, and then if you look at a graph as far as the increase in homelessness, I think you will not be able to distinguish between the two, meaning that the tremendous increases in rents in recent years, largely because of rent laws that have to be strengthened, have led to a dramatic increase in homelessness, and we got to do something to end that.
You hit on one of the major issues in Albany, and I think we're now at the point where we can really fix the problem. All of the quote-unquote bad things that happened because all of the rent laws were sunsetted. And every 2 years, the sunset came around. The Republicans in the Senate, we were basically financed by the landlords in New York, would hold us our feet to the fire on things of things we didn't want. If we just do something as simple as remove the sunset on most of the housing bills, would be in 10 times better shape than we were in. So I think that there will be negotiations with the Senate. They will be more favorable to tenants, that it is not just a New York City issue, but it's also a Westchester County issue, and I think that better things are
Yes.
yet to come.
Tom, I'm going to cut you short.
I just want to make it very brief. I don't want to see it tied to anything else.
Okay, got it.
That's been a gimmick of the governor's, and we have to make sure, no matter how nice it is, that other issue, it should not be tied. We should be dealing with it on its own.
And which committee is this now that would be
This will be
working?
in the Housing Committee.
Housing Committee, okay, all right,
Can I
good.
just ask
Yes.
real quick, just a fast follow-up? Is there
Stand up,
any
Bill.
way to get rid of that 4-year time frame about going back when you're living in a rent-stabilized building, as I am, and I found fraud, and they wouldn't let me file because it was beyond 4 years when the
I
fraud was
hear that there's this really excellent assemblyman who has a bill to do just that.
Good.
Okay.
And I hope that I
We
can
are
get it
gonna-
passed this year.
Thank you.
Stop right here, it's 10 after 2. We've got another 20 minutes or so of work group updates that we need to do, but I wanted to thank you all very much for coming and speaking with us. We'll get to know each other better as the weeks and months go on. So, and please feel free to come to all of our monthly meetings. We invite you to listen into what is important for us. And, we want to hear updates from you, how things are going in Albany. Okay, so thanks
Thank
very
you
much.
all.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, I wanted to give Elliot Engel a minute or two just to say hi, and then we're going to go to the last part of our meeting, okay?
So I finally made the big time. I've been attacked on Fox TV more than anybody else in the past 2 days. So I wanted to give you the good news, actually. They are angry because we took a subcommittee, or we're taking a subcommittee. I've become chairman of, as you know, the Foreign Affairs Committee. So they're taking, thank you. They're taking, we're taking one of the subcommittees that had been a terrorism subcommittee that had been really neglected, which sort of we're doing a reconfiguration. And we took that subcommittee and made it into an investigatory committee where we could investigate the President of the United States and everybody else. So they are saying, well, of course, that's what the Democrats want. That's, and then I'm getting all these tweets about how I don't give a damn about terrorism, which of course is nonsense. Anyway, so it's kind of nice. We have this thing which buzzes every time my name is mentioned. It keeps buzzing. Bill didn't know what to do with it, but it keeps buzzing. But I want to tell you, we're finally, we were late this year because of the shutdown, because of the Bush funeral, and things had to be postponed. So they didn't fill the committees. By now, we know who's returning. We don't know about the freshman who's going to be on. So by this week we should have it, and we're going to go when you get together with some of the other members who are doing hearings as well, and we're going to just let the American people see how Congress is supposed to function. We are a co-equal branch of government. We're not subservient to the executive. We are in Article 1 of the Constitution. They mentioned the legislative branch before they even mentioned the executive branch. And we're just doing our job. If Fox News doesn't like it, I feel sorry for them. Thank you.